Okay, so welcome here for our class here this evening. Throw up my video here. So anyway, glad you're able to make it here. I'm happy to be able to share some of the knowledge that I have about preparing a garden bed and doing a little bit of grafting, and also wanted to talk about growing my really good butternut squash. So pray that this will be beneficial to you and a blessing. So anyway, let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I just ask for your blessing upon this class, that I would be able to share some of the knowledge that I have acquired through your help, and I pray that those that would be watching would be blessed and be able to learn something new, something that would be valuable to them. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So one of the first things that I wanted to look at here is, let's see if I can pull it up here. Oh, so yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention here is the End Time Country Living website. If you haven't been there, go check it out. And so that's at endtimecountryliving.com. Let's see, or is it .com? Let me look at it here. I think it's .org. endtimecountryliving.org. And so that has all of my videos up there underneath the video section there, and there's articles, a few up there. I'm hopefully be able to have some time to add some more here in the future, and events kind of keeps you up to date on what's new things are coming out as far as events that I'm doing, live streams or classes and things like that. So this is kind of what the class page or the events page looks like. So I just wanted to let you know about that. And also I have, so at the top of this page is a get notified of new events. So if you see that link, that links to a form where you can sign up for an email notification, so I can notify you by email. So be sure to hop on there at some point and fill out that form so you can get notifications of next live stream event and things that I'm doing. So wanted to talk about grafting real fast here. It's getting to be about grafting season, and so there's actually, if you are in the Linn County here, there is the Sweet Home Propagation Fair coming up here next Sunday, March 22nd. I wanted to alert you to. So that will be from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. over at the Sweet Home Charter School on Liberty Road in Sweet Home. It's in between Sweet Home and Lebanon, so that's kind of where it's located. It's a free event, and so there will be lots of different cuttings from trees and berries and things like that. So it's a good place to pick up a new variety, do a little bit of research on things that you might like to try and see if they have them there. So they'll have apples and plums and peaches and pears and grapes and figs and all kinds of berries and things like that. So this would be a good opportunity for you to get some new plants or some new varieties that you want to try. You can get some, if you want to do set out some new fruit trees, things like that. This would be a good place to get some scion wood, which is basically a little tree that you cut off the top and you graft on the variety you want. So they have that available as well. So I just wanted to encourage you. They have on if you look on Facebook, Sweet Home Propagation Fair, you can keep up to date with what's happening. Okay, so when we look at grafting, here is kind of an example of what it is all about. So we are basically, this would be an example of a tree that we want to have a particular variety grafted on to a particular variety of roots, that the roots can limit how big the tree gets, so we don't have to prune quite so vigorously every year and take so much off, because the roots kind of have a limiting factor on how much new growth the tree can produce and it also can allow you to get more fruit earlier. When you first plant the tree, the number of years till you can start getting fruit off of it will be decreased if it's a grafted tree. So you can buy a grafted one that's already been grafted and grown up for you. Generally, if you find like a bare root tree, sometimes you can find them for $10 or $15. If they've already been potted up later on in the season, a lot of times they're up to $25 or $35. Or you can get it online at like Burnt Ridge Nursery or Rain Tree. Some of those have trees available that are already grafted for you. So this is just a way that you can save a little money. I think the root stocks generally are around $5 or something like that. And then the what's called the scion wood, which is the top part of the variety you want, that would be free. So that would be a good ways if you need like 5 or 6 trees and you just don't have much money. This would be a good way that you can be able to get the varieties you want and save yourself quite a bit of money. So I wanted to just give you guys a quick little demonstration of this. Some of my stuff here. So anyway, every year there is what's called new growth. It comes out of the top of a tree, and so it looks something like this. And so this is the type of wood that you'd want to use for grafting onto. If you can either save it yourself, or this is kind of what you'd find at a propagation fair. You'd find a little bunch of buckets of little sticks that look like this, about this diameter, and you bring one home and you can either graft it onto a tree that you already have, so you can have multiple varieties, especially if you don't like the variety that's there. You can try to, over time, replace what's there in the tree. Also, you can, like I said, you can create a new tree that you can set out and grow. So anyway, just wanted to show you a quick demonstration of that. So you kind of need a pair of pruners, something that you can cut them up with. So you don't need very much wood in order to graft it on. So when you get a stick like this, you can actually get quite a few different grafts on it. That means if you want to put it on, make several trees, you could do that. Or if you want to put it on an existing tree, you could maybe do 3 or 4 different ones. Some of the wood up here at the top, it gets pretty small, and it's hard to find to match the size very easily. So what we want to do is try to match up the size. So if this was my tree, you'd want to try to match up the size between the two as much as possible. You can put your finger between the two and kind of feel how thick it is. So you can go down here where it's a lot thicker, and you can kind of say, oh yeah, this. And you can kind of look at it and see that the diameter is a lot thicker on one than it is on the other. So it's possible to do a graft where there are different diameters, but it's much more likely to succeed if you try to get it the right diameter. So you want to basically joining them together so that the sap will come up out of the rootstock and into the new wood that you grafted on. So you want to take a knife, the sharpest one you could possibly find, or sharpen it really well. You can use a pocket knife, something that's very sharp, or a kitchen knife or something. Need something fairly sturdy, and then you'd want to do probably the easiest. There's lots of different ways to do different grafts. The one I found that seems to be easy and works quite well is to do just kind of a diagonal cut on the two and join them together. That way you get a lot of surface area. Kind of a oval is the shape that you'd see instead of just a straight circle on the end where you try to join them together. You want to have them overlapping so that you can tape them together and get a strong, something that will hold together while it's healing, and it'll heal up and grow together. So Let's see here. So here we have some buds here. Usually you want to cut off just below a bud on the rootstock part. That would be the part that's coming up. So we want to just go ahead and make a diagonal cut. And you can do this several times, find some sticks or something like that in the yard you can practice with, but that's kind of the angle that you want, such as like that. So then you'd want to do a similar cut on the other piece. You kind of get a little practice, and you want to, enough of the section here without a bud. You don't want to cut it right above a bud. There's a bud right here. And then so you'd want to cut up right below another bud, just the same way we did on the other piece. So you'd take a section, and you want to cut up. I can do it here. You want to try to get a complete oval. And you see there, this one has a little bit of a tab hanging up, and that's not a problem. You can leave that on there if you want, or you can slice it off real carefully on both sides. Trim it up a little bit. That's kind of what you want to get the same angle. And then you just want to put them together like so. So they're overlapping like that. And you want the green area to at least touch on one side. So you don't want some green showing. Let's see here. There's a good way to show you here. So you can see a little bit of green there sticking out. So that means you want to bring down the bark so that it's matches up nicely, so that you don't see that green in there. At least on the sides. On the tip, it doesn't matter so much. But you do want to just do your best and try to keep it nice and straight. And then you want to tape it up. So best economical, something that most of us have access to, or you can get, is a roll of electrical tape. That's has a little bit of a stretch to it. So you want something that you can pull and it'll stretch like that. So that can allow you to get it real tight. Most of the time I use a knife and cut off a little piece about that big and use that to hold it in place. So then see if I can do this. Okay, so there's our tree here. So then we want to line it up and put some tape around it, get it started on the one side there. So we got some tape stuck here. Slide that in there and then wrap it around. And then I want to kind of wiggle it around and adjust it to make sure there's a good fit. Just kind of wrap it around there. So like that. So now that's held in place. Okay. And then we want to do a really good wrap to keep the moisture out and to give it extra strength. So we'd want to start, I think the bottom, finish the top, bottom, I don't remember here. You want it like a shingle down it. So, all right, I think we want to start at the bottom here. I don't remember exactly which direction we want to go. So we want it to shed water. So this would be on a tree situation. It would be reversed on a limb that's hanging down from a tree or something like that. So if we start at the bottom and work our way up, it creates a shingle effect so that the water will go over the top of the next piece like that. There you go. That'll work. Just do a nice wrap there. And get it all the way up there. Okay. And just make sure at the top where the water might run down that it's nice and tight. And just do a quick tear, or you can cut it with the scissors or knife and then just squish it all down in there. Make sure that there isn't any pieces that are sticking up. So anyway, that is a quick graft for you. So that's pretty much all I'm going to cover for that, just to give you an idea of what can be done. And then wanted to go into doing a starting a new garden, or if you want to extend the garden that you have. So I made a few little videos here showing exactly some of the techniques that we can use, especially for like this time of year where we don't have much time before you actually want to get plants in the ground. For our climate here, which is a zone B, no, 9 or 8, 8. I think it's an 8B. Yeah, 8B. That doesn't necessarily tell you a whole lot. All that tells you is how cold it gets, kind of. So hardiness zone doesn't really tell you a whole lot sometimes. But anyway, this is Oregon here, Western Oregon. So we start about May 1st is a good set out date, and for some people, closer to the coast, it may be May 15 or so before you can either plant seeds out in the garden or put transplants out there. So I think here. So then, so in preparing a new garden bed that may be grassy or have weeds in it, I was been thinking about some of the spiritual applications of that and how we can kind of use either one or the other to help us understand either the physical or the spiritual. So the soil reminds me that it's like our mind, and so out of our mind comes all the decisions of life. Let me move this over here. There we go. So it determines, just like the soil does, largely the success and the failure of bearing good fruit. So that would be the soil. And then when preparing the soil for growing good food, you first need to look carefully at what is growing now. Maybe it's just weeds, or maybe there's just a few little weeds out there and it's mostly soil. And so we may just want to hoe it up a little bit. There may not be a need to completely turn over the soil and bury what's on the surface. And sometimes I guess the same needs to happen in our spiritual life. We need to analyze, what sins are in our life. We need to look carefully at our motives and our actions and compare them with the Bible. Maybe we just need simple confession and repentance to make us right with God. And if our hearts are completely covered with sin, we need to be baptized first, and then maintained with confession and forgiveness. I see baptism like turning under the soil, like turning it completely over and burying the weeds and the grass that are on the surface. Our whole direction in life needs to change, and that's what happens when we're baptized. We're making a choice to change it completely. And when we have a new garden bed where there's lots of grass and weeds on it, we need to completely change the direction of what's growing there by burying it, flipping it over, and changing the direction that the plants are trying to grow. We usually only need to do it once and then maintain the soil by hoeing or pulling the weeds out. So that also correlates with baptism. We generally only need to be baptized once, and then we use confession and forgiveness to maintain our life after that. So before we are baptized, it is important to study and be convinced of the new direction that we want to go. Likewise, in the soil, we need to mow or cut down as close as possible the plants that are growing there so that the tops don't stick out when turned over and start to grow again. In the Bible, it talks about receiving the Holy Spirit after baptism, which gives us new life inside. After turning over the soil, we want to add new life and encourage the biology, the bacteria, the nematodes, the fungi, the protozoa, microarthropods. These are all the creatures that are in the soil, and so we want to encourage those to grow. So I have, let's see here, so the first step would be to turn over the soil. Let me look at the live stream here. Okay, just checking the chat here. Okay, so it looks like what's going on there. Okay, so let's look at the video here that I took earlier. Go over here. Not sure if you guys are able to hear this or not. Doesn't seem like it's coming through very well here. Let me stop it here, see if I can get the sound to come through better for you. Let's see here. What's going on here? Yeah, okay, let's see find a different way to look at it here. Okay, let me try something else here real quick. So there's that. Color. Okay, all right, well, for some reason the audio doesn't want to work here, so I apologize for that. It was working just before I went live, but as soon as I went live, then it decided to stop working. So anyway, I'll do a commentary over the top here to see if I can remember everything. So basically saying that we need to we need to mow over the grass here. You can see the grassy area here. So, and then the area where it's already been where it's, oh, hold on here, we're out of sync here. What's going on here? There we go. Okay, so we need to show with my hand mowing it down before we want to actually turn it over so that the grass doesn't stick up here. So here's an area where I have already turned it over, and so I can use a shovel here. This is kind of a pointed shovel, and there's several different types. This is the only one that I currently style that I have, but you could use a square spade or a rounded spade or anything like that as well. And then it's good to kind of file the edge down to get a sharp edge, so when you get cut through the sod here, it'll go in fairly easily. So you want to kind of start backwards so that you're kind of stepping backwards as you go rather than turning it around. If you try to cut into the sod with the tip of the shovel, it's going to be very hard to pull it up. But if you have the tip of the shovel or the front of the shovel pointed towards the ground that you've already turned under, it'll be much easier to take a little bite off of there. And so you want to do fairly vertical going down, but if you hit some rocks or something in the soil as you go into there, you can kind of pull back a little bit and go in at more of an angle to get over the top and just kind of take off as much soil underneath the sod as possible. So you get a chunk out like that, and then you want to go ahead and just lay it beside the hole. And it takes a little bit of practice to get the motions down to do it readily here. And then you take the tip of the shovel and you go ahead and just push it down into the hole there, just like that. And then you can use the tip of the shovel to kind of break it up a little bit, or you could step on it a little bit with your shoe, just to kind of want to get those grass sod layer completely buried as much as possible. And then you just kind of move to the side and keep going. And sometimes you disrupt some of the other ones around, so you just kind of try to keep them all happy and everything else around it to keep the sod buried. So you can see I'm kind of stepping on it and smashing it a little bit. Shove it back down in there because there'll be some air gaps underneath there. Sometimes you don't always get a full piece, but do the best you can and try to keep buried all the tops of the grass that you can. And if you see something sticking out, well, step on it a little bit and smash it and knock some dirt over it like I was doing. You just kind of keep moving through it like that. Just kind of flip it beside or lay it down beside and then flip it over. So it's a little bit strenuous. It's good exercise, but it's not terrible. It's you can be a fairly good standing position most of the time, and it's kind of fun to be able to dig around in the soil there. It's if you see some stuff in the soil that shouldn't be there, it's a good time to pull it out, clean up. If there are rocks or something, you could dig underneath there and take out a big rock if you see that's in there. This soil here isn't terribly rocky, but there's other parts of my garden that are. So usually you want to dig up more than just the area that you want for your garden. You want to have a kind of a border around it. So that's what I'm kind of doing here, just kind of any of the grass around the edges. Also make it a foot wider, usually on either side, or maybe even 2. So this showing here that once you have finished this, then you can use a little tiller over the top to try to break up the roots and the clods there, or you could use a rake to kind of smooth it out, and so that would allow you to have more of a smooth surface. This is kind of a very rough surface, and so usually when you have a field, you use a plow or something like that, and it'd be kind of very lumpy, and then they go over it with a harrow to little teeth or tines that are on a drag behind, and that would kind of break things up. So that kind of the similar thing, we want to kind of break up the clods on the top here, the chunks of soil, and roots and things like that, so that we can have a smooth surface in which to plant into, and also to sow our seeds. So I'm using the rake here the tines to try to break up the clods here a little bit. Just kind of smacking it a bit. You don't want to be raking with the rake with the tine side down, because you'll end up flipping the or letting some of the tops of the grass come up and get light. So you can shove things down. If you pull one up accidentally, you can take your heel of your boot there or shoe, and you can kind of smash it back down again. And this doesn't take terribly long. It's just kind of go in there and breaking up the soil in the back, and try to keep everything buried. And then you can flip over the rake and use the back of it there to rake over and rake soil around. And then if you find some rocks there, like I found some rocks there, you can pick those up and get it like a bucket or some kind of can or something like that. You can fill up and keep handy there to put rocks in. So I have a little 5-gallon bucket there I use for some roots in there even that I found earlier, and little big chunks and things like that. Just try to clean it up a little bit, make it nice. You can see I'm kind of using the back of the rake both to bang things around and also to rake. And if you find something, weeds sticking up or something like that, and you can go ahead and just flip them over and either step on them or something like that, and pull some dirt over them, and it'll keep everything so that the sod layer and the weeds will die. So like I said, kind of reversing the direction that it was growing. And there isn't really that much depth. You're only talking about 5 to 6 inches or so, maybe up to 8 if you really go deep. But the biology isn't going to be really harmed too much by flipping it over like that. I'm just showing how you can use the back of the rake there to try to whack it and rake it around a little bit. You can see that if you use the tines there, that they can grab the edge of the sod there and pull it up so that the grass can see light. So that's why you kind of have to be careful to not rake with the tines side. Okay, so then after we get the that part of it done, where we have it all turned over, then we want to be adding some amendments and some inoculants and maybe some mulch layer on top. Okay, let's see what we can do to make that work here. So let's see here. Okay, so then we have, let's see, turn this intro. Interesting. Okay, so let's see what we can do here to get the next one here. So there's that. Okay, what happened here? Did that work? Oh. Okay, well, that seems to work. Let's see if we can't get this to work here. So let's go here, and there. Okay, so you can see the video there. Let's see. Hey, there we go. Now we got some audio, so that works. Skip ahead here. Okay, so that just kind of gives you a little idea of how to actually mix some of this up here. As I mentioned, or just this is to kind of give an inoculant and also to increase the biology that's also in the soil where you're applying it here. So I want to be able to just sprinkle it out over the soil surface, and just a light sprinkle, and just kind of keep sprinkling it over for a certain area that you're sprinkling over. Just kind of do back and forth and around and trying to get it all kind of evenly distributed. And then I wanted to also show you a little bit about doing kind of some dry amendments that you can also add. Let's see here. So then, right one. Yep. Okay, let's see if we can get this to work here.
Are you done?
Calcium carbonate. This is also known as agricultural lime. You can also come in a form of gray form as well. This is white form. So that's one major mineral that is easily leached out of soils. Rained on for a long time. Calcium. So this is something that can stimulate biology and get things working, and also provide more calcium to the plants that you'll be growing there. Another mineral that we can add is boron. And boron goes with calcium. It also helps to transport it into the plant. And boron is also very leachable from rain. And so it's something that usually most soils are deficient in. So we're going to add a little bit of that. And another thing that we can add to our soil when we're starting out, and this is also good every year as well. This is Litterdite, and this is a mine product that has 3 words. Fungus that is usually working in there if there is fungus in the compost that you have. Not all compost has much fungus in there, so adding some of this can really stimulate the biology in your soil and to help convert minerals into a form that's more stable and less leachable. So we're going to start in order to best apply these. Mix these into like a compost or a peat moss or something like that, as it helps to evenly spread it out over the area, because small quantities of a powder is very difficult to spread out over a large area. And so we can use compost to kind of buffer it and to kind of create a substance that can be mixed in evenly too. Also, when it's a little bit of breeze, can easily blow fine powder like calcium around and blow it off, and you lose it. So you need to make it more heavy and bind to something. So compost that's a little bit damp, but not super. You don't want it to be wet, but just a little bit damp can really help to keep it from blowing off. So I have a little tub here that I can mix these up in. So I'm going to take some compost here. Put some of that into here. Just put some gloves on here so I don't get my hands all dirty. and kind of break up some of the clumps in here and make it more of a fine texture. And pick out anything that don't need to have that in there. See a few worms already in here. So I'm just kind of putting some in the bottom here. Put the amendments on top so that they don't get stuck to the bottom, and it's much easier to incorporate them when they're added to the top in compost. So take out some measuring devices here, measuring spoon here, and put in a couple tablespoons of calcium in here. A little bit on the surface there, and then we'll put about a tablespoon of the Leonardite in here as well. Kind of a brownish, really dark brown powder. Sprinkle that in there. Don't need a whole lot. And then put about a teaspoon of the boron in there, or the borax here. It's not 100% boron, so it's extremely important to be too careful about the measurement of it, but it can get toxic after certain levels, so you don't want to put too much. That's why I only put about a teaspoon in here. Okay. So now we have our minerals and the Leonardite in there. So I'll just kind of blend those together here. Work it around in here. Smash any clumps and break it up, and don't want it to be clumped or any of the powders to be clumped up together. A nice thorough mix in the compost. Okay, so we have our blend here, and so we'll take it out to our new garden area and to distribute that evenly over the surface of the soil. Okay, so that gives us an idea of kind of how to mix it up, and so then it's just to basically take your hand in there and sprinkle it. So I just wanted to mention, as I was watching myself put on the gloves and mix it up, I was thinking, oh, someone's going to think that it's toxic and you need to wear gloves in order to protect yourself. But actually, the gloves are just there to keep my hands clean, because I'd be able to work with the video on and off and things like that. I don't want muddy hands or start to get dirty hands. The gloves are just there convenient to keep my hands from getting dirty. So anyway, there's nothing in there that would be harmful. In fact, when I go out to spread it out over the garden, then I use, it's something I can just use with bare hands, and there's no problem there. So just this really kind of weights it down so that you don't have to worry about it blowing around. And I've seen a lot of people kind of distribute lime and other minerals out there, and you see, probably 20% of it is blowing away in the breeze, and then it's also not good to breathe too. So mixing in with compost, I think, is a really good idea and tip to allow you to sprinkle it out evenly, especially small quantities. It's very hard to distribute small quantities of a mineral over a large area, and be able to just kind of do a light little sprinkle. It's very difficult, but when you mix it in the right proportions into something like compost, you can it's much easier to distribute a large quantity over a large area, and then you have the right amount for that area, and half the bed doesn't get a whole lot, and the other half gets just a little sprinkle because you ran out of a little amount that you wanted to add, like boron or something like that. So that would be kind of the second thing that we want to do. And then the third would just be to add a compost layer over the surface of the soil. Or if you don't have compost, you can use some kind of mulch, or you could even, until you're ready to plant or something like that, you could lay on some black plastic or a tarp or something over the soil just to kind of protect it from the weather. And I think compost is probably the best type of mulch that you can use over the surface of the soil that you can plant right into. But you could use something like peat moss. You could use something like pelleted alfalfa. So that would be something else that you could use to just kind of lay over the surface of the soil. It can feed the biology. It has minerals in there as well that give the plants a little bit extra boost until the biology can kind of kick in and have kind of that symbiotic relationship with them. The plant is going to be exuding exudates throughout its roots, sugars that are very similar to the molasses. So the molasses is really there to kind of jumpstart the biology until the plants are able to start exuding their sugars. And so that's a good way to kind of get that biology boosted. So when you put in your plants or your seeds, the biology is already there, built up. It's already converting the minerals that are in the soil in a form that the plant can't use into a form that they can use. So I just want to run down through that. So anyway, that's kind of what I had for you as far as starting a new garden bed. I hope that makes sense. And we have to we'll do this topic again, a little more refined, because I think it was pretty rough here. I apologize for all the video woes here. When I was testing it, I hit play and my head, didn't have my headphones in there and everything seemed to be coming through, but I see that once the headphones are in there, all of a sudden, then the streamer can't hear the video anymore. So I think that's probably what the issue was. That's why I was able to finally get it figured out here. So I wanted to also talk about, let's see, we have, there we go, slides. So we have our slides here. So there's that breaking new ground. So then we have growing winter squash. And I think that's a very interesting thing to do. It's a very kind of a unique crop. It's a fruit, really. It's comes on a vine, just kind of like a tomato would, or cucumber, or any other kind of fruit that would be there on a vine. Grapes or anything like that. They're all in the fruit family, and so. But something special about them is that they keep very well. Apples are about the only other crop that's a fruit that really keeps well over the winter, and they need to be kept cold, but squash can actually be kept fairly warm. And in a warm, dry environment, they store very well. And if you grow them yourself and you have, are working on the soil to get good quality soil, you'll have, very tasty squash, very sweet, especially if they get good sunlight. If they get quite a bit of shade, then they tend to not be as sweet and they don't ripen up as soon. But they can also be cooked in many different ways, and there's lots of different varieties out there. So one of the other main varieties you find in the grocery store quite often is butternut squash. I mean, not butternut squash. This is acorn squash. Usually has little ribs on there. It's fairly smooth skin. So there's some fairly compact. They usually don't get very big, and so they're kind of convenient. You could cook one up and you can eat it for a meal, and you don't need to have excess. So that can be very convenient if you just want to have squash one time a week and you don't want to have to eat it for the next 3 or 4 days because you have a huge squash. So that can be a very nice squash and fairly tasty. This is buttercup squash. So this is a little bit, has more of a pumpkin shape to it with a kind of a center cavity. And so this is kind of more of a dry squash. It is not quite so juicy. And when you cook it, and you can, very good for baking, things like that. And so that's a very tasty one. And my favorite, butternut squash. This is it's very disease resistant and pest resistant. And so this is a very good variety to start out with. And also, if the Waltham variety is a very good one to try. That one matures in about 85 days, as opposed to 95 or 100 for a lot of the other, I guess, it's a variety, not a variety of squash, but a variety of butternut. There's, there different people have bred the butternut squash and come up with different combinations and selected for qualities. So the Waltham, it's a very good one that I've done for many years and seems to do quite well. This is a delicata squash, Delicata, delicata. So this one I tried last year. I didn't have very good success. They are quite small, but all of my squash were quite small last year because of the weather, primarily. I think it's mainly lack of a lot of heat and sun. There's a lot more clouds, and we had just kind of a cool summer overall, and so they didn't do so well. But and so one other thing about delicata that I found out, they do have a very good flavor, very strong flavor, fairly sweet, but they don't not noted for keeping real well. So that's one of the downsides. You want to use them up within the first 3 or 4 months. I think they mentioned like February is kind of the last, they start to decay. I still have one, I think, that's still in fairly good shape, but it's kind of on its way out. So that's one of the downsides, where the Waltham butternuts, they'll keep for, let's see, 12 months or so. So once you pick it, you should be able to keep it. In fact, I have ones from not this last year, but the 2018 squash. I still have, about 3 of them that are sitting there by my wood stove that are still in good shape. They start to get, they start to break down a little bit, so they're not necessarily super desirable. The quality of the flesh goes down and gets a little bit spongy, but they're still edible, but they're not rotting, so that's one benefit. So this is a Hubbard squash. And there's different ones. There's light green ones, and I think there's, they generally have about that shape to them, kind of like a football shape to them. And there's, like I said, there's green ones and there's orange ones and things like that. So they're quite a nice squash, and they're noted for keeping quite a while. And then this picture isn't probably the best here. They don't tend to. This would be a spaghetti squash. And let me switch back over to the video. So here is one of the ones that I grew last year, and it didn't get, they can get double this size on a good year, but this wasn't a good year, so they didn't get terribly big. But they're actually quite nice. They're noted for not keeping well, but I've had actually pretty good success. So we're into middle of March here, and so they seem to be holding up quite nicely. So the better healthier the plant, the longer that they will tend to keep. If they have good mineral content, they'll tend to last a lot longer, and complex carbohydrates in there. So anyway, so this is kind of the one that I grew, and they tend to most squash, when it lays on the ground. So this brown stuff here, this is kind of like a little scab, and they'll tend to do that when it lays on the ground. That side will tend to have a little bit of a scab there. The butternut not quite so much. So this is one of the butternuts that I grew last year, and they can get up to twice this big in weight. They tend to have a very small little cavity in them as well, and they have most of the top part here is all meat. It's all solid in there, so that makes them very nice for not having to scoop out very much and have this big cavity of these seeds and things like that. So, and then, oops, there's that. So anyway, some tips as far as growing. Most of the time I do starts. So that would be starting the seeds now for my climate here. About the 15th of March is a good time, and then that gives me 6 weeks of growing time in the greenhouse before I set them out in the garden about May 1st. And you can buy starts as well if you're not able to have a greenhouse or window space enough or lights to get good starts going. You can also, now the only problem with a lot of these squash, they take a big long, 85, well, it's 85 good days or something like that. But usually it's, I may get a few ripe earlier, and then some of the later ones that come on, to get all like 5 squash per plant ripe, then it usually is about frost time. October 1st takes till to get them all ripe. So starting them as early as possible is a good strategy in order to get them all ripe. So if you have trouble with that, try getting starts, or try in your own house to get starts going earlier. So maybe even a little earlier than this if you have a shorter growing season. See if you can get them going. But if you can, I find them very, very delicious, and use multiple uses for them, especially the butternut squash. They're quite flavorful and sweet and easy to work with and store for a very long time. It's the ones I tend to like to grow, and people tend to that I give them to all seem to like the butternut squash very well. It gets a little bit boring to have that same squash over and over again. It's nice to have a little bit of flavor variation. But in the coming years, maybe next year I'll experiment with a few more. I'm trying to cut back this year and just kind of have a more relaxed, not try any new varieties necessarily. I have a few new things I'm trying, but it's the fruits and vegetables are kind of the old standards, and limiting how much I'm growing just to cut back on my workload here and have other things, priorities that I want to focus on. So anyway, anything else that I wanted to discuss about them? So they tend to be, let's see here, cucumber beetles tend to be a problem in the early spring with them. And I really have, so netting can be good. I've used different fabrics from the fabric store as netting, and those can work with some hoops, little wire hoops, to kind of protect the plants from, like, the striped cucumber beetle is a particular pest that likes cucumbers, and they like squash and melons especially. So that is one thing you can do to try to cover them up, or you can find some commercial insect netting. You could even use like a fabric, Rime. It's kind of like a brand name, but it's like a spun fabric that you can use. It's kind of like a frost protection. So in the early, you could use that to cover them up to try to protect against the cucumber beetles if you have that problem. I didn't have them for years until one year they decided to show up a couple of years ago, and now they're a problem almost every year. So I'm working on the health of the soil and trying to build that up so that the plants can defend themselves and they won't be as much of a food source. But beetles are they're kind of the top of the food chain for the insects, and they got the best digestive system, and they can handle a lot, so they can be a very healthy plant. They can still digest it and attack it. So and then later on in the towards the end of the season, you may get powdery mildew. So probably the best way to counteract that is to use a solution of hydrogen peroxide in water, diluted down. So you think it's like a normal 3% solution you'd buy in the store, and then you want to dilute that down. So 3/4 of a cup to a gallon is a good ratio. So you can try that, and you put that in a little sprayer and spray the leaves and underside and things like that. That will kind of sterilize the leaves, and then it kind of evaporates very quickly after it sterilizes the leaves, so there's no harm to the soil, or it doesn't cause any other problems. So just as long as you don't get it too strong, if you try to do full solution on the plants, it can burn the leaves a little bit, and kind of they'll recover, but they'll be a little bit damaged. So keeping it diluted, like I mentioned, about 3/4 of a cup to a gallon or so, and a gallon spray or something like that, or 1.5 cups to 2 gallons or something like that. If you have a 2-gallon spray or something like that, to kind of spray the leaves. People say baking soda is also another good remedy for that. You can put a little bit tablespoon of baking soda or so in the solution as well, or just by itself, and spray that. So basically that increases the pH on the surface of the leaf, and that makes an inhospitable environment for the fungus to be growing. This what's the term here? Bad fungus, I guess the term. There's a term for that. Pathogen, I guess. Yeah, pathogenic fungus. So that's just a few of the problems that you have there. Keeping a good mulch layer on the surface of the soil usually helps them. They like to kind of spread out, and then also they tend to, on the vines, if you let them go on the ground, they will actually put down little roots and different parts of the vine, so that can be helpful to get more nutrition if you let it kind of go on the surface of the soil in there. So anyway, that could be helpful. Anything else? Tips? So yeah, they don't care. They'll be killed at the frost. So watch when they're getting towards the end of the season, end of September. Watch the forecast carefully, and look for any cold nights. And if you see a cold night coming, go ahead and get them harvested, because you don't want the fruit can be damaged. It can handle a little bit of frost, but one night maybe. If you notice, wake up in the morning, frost, the fruit can still be good. It can still handle that if it's fully ripe. If it's still a little bit green on there, it can be damaged, and you'll see a little bit of a darker green on little patches of it. So that can be hurt by that. So try to get them in. Watch the weather and try to keep them on there as long as possible, and then harvest them when it looks like the weather's going to be freezing there, and bring them inside. Wash them off before you bring them in. Clean them up, and then here's an example of how to do let me switch over to the slides here. So you notice the stem on this one. No, this is obviously not a butternut, but regardless, you do this for any the squash. So you want it to clip the stem very close, but you don't want to break the stem off. So it's going to keep better if you keep that stem on there, but you want to take some pruners and prune those off really close so they don't damage each other when you got several of them and they roll around or fall over, and having a sharp, you can even trim the corners off, or take a file or something and knock some of those edges off on the stem there to keep it from damaging others' squash. So anyway, hope that helps to give you some tips on growing squash. I think they're very versatile and useful, and I usually cook them up in a pressure cooker, and so once it gets up to pressure, I usually do it for about 10 minutes or so, sometimes 15, and on a little lower temperature. And so that gives me a nice soft squash, and you can also eat the skin on the butternuts. So that's a very nice feature of them. The spaghetti squash, I do that for about 5 minutes or so in the pressure cooker once it gets up to pressure. And that gives a place where you can take a fork and just kind of scrape it all out, or you take a spoon and kind of scoop it all out. It has usually a hard shell. And so that's very nice for using as a pasta replacement. You can put some good spaghetti sauce on that, and that's quite good. Some garlic, and so it's a very nice pasta replacement there. It's very healthy. And so anyway, there's lots of interesting squashes out there, and baking them is a good way to do it as well. Though it takes about an hour or so to cook them, so there's that time consideration, and usually ovens take a lot of electricity, so if it's a little more costly way to cook them. I think as far as nutrition goes, as long as you're in the pressure cooker, you're drinking the juices or mixing the juices in when you're eating them. You're not just throwing them out. Any extra water. You put maybe about an inch or so of water in the bottom when you cook them, as long as that's mixed in with the squash and eaten. Then you're not losing the vitamins that might be water soluble. But the baking is probably the best as far as retaining all the nutrients in there. But so you can decide. Most of the time I don't have time to bake it for an hour, or no, I don't want to run the oven that long. So anyway, just give you some tips there. So that's about it for today, and thank you for coming on this live stream here, and we'll see what we're going to be doing next week here. I hopefully be doing some more live streaming next week. And anyway, I'll see y'all later. Bye bye.